Marcel Zelinsky grew up in Krakow in Poland and was taken with his family to the ghetto in Krakow, place that I visited recently, the Ghetto Square, and then from there to a small concentration camp outside Krakow, and eventually he ended up in Auschwitz. When Auschwitz was liberated, he was 10 years old. And Marcel didn't know what else to do. So with some of his friends who also survived the horrors of that place, he walked 60 miles from Auschwitz to Krakow, the place where he had been born and grown up, and tried to find the apartment of his childhood. And did find the apartment of his childhood, but no one was there. So he was taken to an orphanage. 6 months later, it turned out that his mother had also survived, and they were reunited in Krakow and eventually moved to Canada, where they made a life for themselves. And as Marcel grew up, among other things, he became quite a keen cyclist. And Marcel was on the same bike ride that I was on just a few weeks ago. Now 88 years old, riding on a tandem bike with Jonathan Ornstein, who's the CEO of the JCC in Krakow, riding in the footsteps that he walked as a 10-year-old boy from Auschwitz to Krakow. I haven't spoken that much about the bike ride that I did since being back, and I wanted to today, and connect it a little bit to the Parsha. The Ride for the Living is a ride that's been going now for about 10 years. And it really is dedicated to Marcel and to the other survivors. But the fact that we're riding a bike for 60 miles in those footsteps of Marcel, 209 riders this year. And we're picked up from Krakow, from our hotel, at about 5 o'clock in the morning and taken by bus to Birkenau, otherwise known as Auschwitz II, the place where Irene Rosenstein and other survivors that we have known spent their days there in those horrendous conditions. Very few people who entered the gates of Auschwitz left alive, but many of us have been fortunate to know people who did survive. We, of course, here knew Irene Rosenstein, but there are others who survived. And so meeting in Birkenau, in Auschwitz II, with a whole bunch of people in biking clothes and a platform set up, Chief Rabbi of Poland, his deputy, Rabbi Avi, Jonathan Ornstein, the executive director of the JCC, the CEO of the JCC, and not one but two survivors who both survived Auschwitz, who both rode with us, giving talks about the meaning of this ride and the significance of what it meant to be riding for the living. What does it mean, riding for the living? It means that, of course, we're honoring the memories of those who did not live, but we're also recognizing the fact that there is a regeneration of Jewish life in Poland. It will never be the same, obviously. There will never be a full revival from the ashes of Auschwitz. However, there is a revival of Jewish life. The Ride for the Living coincides with the Jewish Cultural Festival in Krakow, which draws thousands and thousands of people from all over the world listening to incredible Jewish music. And so the energy of the ride is very, very, very powerful. So we have this opening ceremony. The rabbis speak. The Israeli ambassador to Poland spoke, and various other people spoke at the opening. Then we go and find our bikes, and we ride 60 miles, stopping every 15 miles for a ridiculous amount of snacks. It's a Jewish bike ride, so you... And then eventually, and this is all on a Friday, eventually coming into Krakow, to the city of Krakow, riding along the river. And by the way, some of the ride is so beautiful, the countryside. And I have these memories of Irene Rosenstein telling the story about when they were in the cattle car on the way to Auschwitz, and she would talk about the Polish peasants in the fields that they would see as the train was passing by, going like that. and like knowing that they were sort of on their way to a death camp, and the fear and the trauma of that. And the experience of riding a bike through some of that same countryside, and every single place we went, having Polish people out on the streets waving and cheering, and really like, I don't know for certain, but I think they knew who we were and what we were doing. And they're sort of healing their own trauma in a way. You know, there's the narrative that all Polish people hate Jews and wanted us all gone is a narrative that a lot of people are challenging. Because the regeneration of Jewish life in Poland is in part a reality of the fact that there are a lot of non-Jews of this young generation who are either discovering that they actually have a Jewish grandparent that they never knew about, or just wanting to understand more about Judaism. And there are lots of people who end up converting through the Chief Rabbi of Poland's office. And so it's a very extraordinary thing. The JCC in Krakow is also helping 220,000 Ukrainian refugees, because Krakow is quite near the Ukrainian border, and there's been a lot of aid efforts that have been going on there. So as well as this regeneration of Jewish life, it's extraordinary. So we ride through the countryside, we ride along by a bike path by the river, and we come into the old town of Krakow, and then we come to the place where the JCC is, which is not a huge building. And we all arrive at about 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, and to music and cold beer and all these banners and this congratulatory kind of experience. It's not saying like, you know, as Jonathan Ornstein says, it is no longer Auschwitz period, it's Auschwitz comma. Because European Jewry did not, as the Nazis wished, end in Poland. It's continuing and it's rebuilding. And there's something very powerful about being part of that journey. It was something extremely powerful and moving for me being part of that journey. So we get there at 6 o'clock, having been up since 4, having ridden 60 miles in one day. And then those of us, and it's not that many people on the ride, honestly, who really want to keep Shabbat, have about 20 minutes to shower, turn around, and get to a shul. And then at 9 o'clock, having been up for so long and having ridden so many miles, at 9 o'clock there's a Shabbat dinner with 700 people in this massive hall, with the Chief Rabbi of Poland and his deputy and all the ambassadors and all of the riders, and 4 tables of Hillel students from the Krakow University, and people who are just there for the cultural festival who've signed up for a Shabbat dinner, a fully kosher buffet with meat and fish and vegetarian and vegan options all around. 700 people. And of course all of us on the ride are like... But there was something very, very powerful about being in Krakow, which was once a thriving center of Jewish life, where now most of the synagogues that were once flourishing are basically museums, and being there and celebrating that life was so amazing. That was an experience. And I want to talk a bit more about the person whose story I told at the beginning, Marcel Zelensky. Just an extraordinary human being, like so many survivors that we have met. Someone who chooses, he's still alive and kicking and riding, chooses every day of his life to live positively, chooses every day of his life to love, chooses every day of his life to continue on, despite of the horrors of what he experienced when he was so young. And there's something about that tenacity and commitment that so many survivors have that is so inspiring, and that so relates, I think, to one of the core messages of our parsha. Another survivor of Auschwitz, who you may have heard of, a woman called Edith Eger, who wrote a book in 2018 called The Choice. She's still alive, and she's, I think, 103 at this point. And her whole life has been dedicated, like Viktor Frankl, who also survived Auschwitz, to preserving the memory in a positive way, in saying that we, even though our bodies were degraded, even though we were imprisoned, no one could take away our mind And no one could take away our ability to choose in each moment. And so what Edith Eger in her book The Choice talks about is the difference between victimization and victimhood. She says victimization is what happens to us, and terrible things happen to us. You know, God forbid, I think none of us, I hope, ever going to experience anything as traumatic and awful as being in a concentration camp. But we all experience trauma in different ways. We all experience loss in different ways. And that we can't control. And in a sense, we are victims of circumstance, we're victims of tragedy, we're victims of what life throws at us. But that doesn't mean we take on victimhood and become and live our lives defined by being a victim, which is what Edith Eger says. I'm never going to define my life as a victim. And she says, in fact, a very powerful quote. She says, "The most important truth I know, that the biggest prison is in your own mind, and in your pocket you already hold the key, the willingness to take absolute responsibility for your life. You can't change what happened. You can't change what you did or what was done to you, but you can choose how you live now." And that's really the message of this parsha. It's all about choice. It says, the first verse, "Re'ei anochi noten lifnechem hayom b'chava klala." See, as I said at the beginning of the parsha, that see which is in the singular, addressing each one of us as an individual in the context of community. Anochi, I placed before you hayom, today, a bracha and a klala, a blessing and a curse. Choose the blessing. The profundity of sight beyond what we might see as apparent in front of us, transcending what the circumstances might be telling us, seeing beyond, seeing in what might appear to be a horrible curse, a blessing. And sometimes it's the opposite way around. What sometimes appears to be a blessing might be a curse. Yesterday at the Shabbat in the park, I told that famous Chinese parable about the farmer who has a beautiful horse, and all the neighbors agree that it's the most beautiful horse in the world, and one day the horse runs away, and the neighbors go, "Oh no, that's terrible, your horse has gone away," and he says, maybe not. And then a few days later the horse comes back with 7 wild horses, and the neighbors say, "Wow, that's amazing, your horse has come back with 7 wild horses. That's so beautiful and amazing." Let's wait and see, maybe. And maybe not. And then one day the farmer's son is trying to break in those horses and is thrown off one of those horses and breaks his leg in multiple places, and all the neighbors say, "Oh no, that's terrible. That's terrible. Your son's broken his leg. That's an awful thing." Maybe, and maybe not. Let's wait and see. And then 2 days later, conscriptors from the army come, and they are conscripting people to go to war, and they take a look at the farmer's son. They say, "Well, we're not taking him. He's got a broken leg." And all of the people of the village say, "Oh, that's wonderful. Isn't that wonderful? Your son is not going to go and fight in the war." Maybe, and maybe not. And of course, that parable is so perfect for this parsha, because it's like, we don't know in any one moment what is a blessing and what is a curse. It's all about the choice we make and how we live in the aftermath of what happens to us, good or bad. And the choices that we make, like Marcel and other survivors like Irene, who was one of the most loving people. Those of us who knew Irene, she just oozed love. And she went through hell, and she oozed love every day of her life. And so we who go through whatever we go through, we may be victims in the sense that terrible things have happened to us, but we don't have to define ourselves as victims. We can rise beyond that. And when is this happening? Hayom, today. The Kedushat Levi, I better quote the Kedushat Levi because Sarah has a yahrzeit for her mother, and she's a direct descendant of the Kedushat Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berditchev, the Hasidic Rebbe who was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And he has this incredible teaching about that first verse, about this idea of Hayom, because it says every day in our in our liturgy in Shachrit, we read Hamachadesh Betuvo B'chol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh V'Reishit, right? Which is that every single day in God's goodness, the creation is renewed for us. And he relates that to the Hayom in this week's Parsha, the today, because he says, B'chol Yom Hainu B'einecha Kachadashim, which means that every single day we are given new eyes. Every single day we're given new eyes. So Ra'eh, see, Anochi noten lefnechem hayom, today, a bracha and a klala, see that I'm giving this to you today, but what I'm really giving you today is a new set of eyes, so that you can always see the good, so that you can always see the blessing, so that you can see beyond what appears to be awful, or beyond what appears so apparent, and see something else. We just said the blessing for the month of Elul, right? The month of Elul is beginning on Thursday and Friday. We're going to start the new month with our incredible dedication of this Torah scroll, right? This Torah scroll that was written in 1775, that was in the former Czechoslovakia, that was in Prague, that survived the Holocaust, that was found along with 1,563 other Torah scrolls, was found in a warehouse in Prague in the 1950s, and in 1964 all 1,564 of these Torah scrolls were taken to the Westminster Synagogue in London. And this particular scroll was one of the first to go into a community in the north of England, and then another community in the north of England, and then it went back to the Westminster Synagogue, and now, as of last week, it's our Torah. Amazing story. That Torah, as we've been saying throughout this whole journey, if that Torah could tell the stories that it's seen, if that Torah, what it's been through, what it's gone through, the journeys, and who knew that it was going to fly first class on United Airlines? Flight 26 in the overhead bin. For sure we know it's the only airline, the only flight that it's been on, because we know that it came by boat and truck from Prague to London, and then it was just shipped around in England. So it's certainly its only flight, and hopefully it'll be its last flight because it's found a new home here, right? But those stories, when people tell, like when Joni's telling the story of her father, when Sarah's telling the story of her mother, it's like the stories that we tell up on this bima that kind of are interwoven with the stories that we read in the Torah. It's all in some ways about hayom, about choosing every day to make choices. So the fact that our Rosh Chodesh Elul, which is the month of introspection, the month where we start doing the work of teshuvah, the month where we really look inside and start thinking, who do we want to be in this coming year? It says in the Parsha, in another part of the Parsha, do what is tov v'yashar b'nei Hashem. Do what is good and what is just in God's eyes. We see through our eyes limited. We have limited perception. We see negativity. We see schmutz. We see people that trigger us and annoy us. We see whatever we see. But if we're seeing the world through the lens of God's eyes, we see beauty. We see hope. We see the power of survival and the amazing stories that happen, right? And when? Hayom. Today, right? We see it. Every moment we have that opportunity to make those choices. And so with Elul coming, and with our dedication of our new Torah scroll, we are seeing in a different way. We've been given a new set of eyes. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, in his teaching, says that on Shabbat, every person gets a new set of eyes. Shabbos eyes. Shabbos eyes that see the world in a very different way to how we see the world in the week, where we hakarat tov, where we see the goodness and the beauty in everybody and in ourselves. So on this Shabbat of Re'eh, this Shabbat of Mevarachim Chodesh Elul, where we're blessing the month of Elul, may we recognize that Hayom, today, we've been given a new set of eyes to see the world beyond the circumstances that the world gives us, to elevate and to see beyond and to transcend, so that we like those incredible survivors like Marcel Zelinsky and like Edith Eger, we can choose every day to live and to love. Shabbat Shalom.